Chapter 2. The True Meaning of Archons. The word Archon has accumulated an enormous amount of meaning over time. In modern spiritual culture, it often evokes images of hidden rulers, predatory entities, energetic parasites, or cosmic jailers, deliberately keeping humanity trapped within a false reality. But before accepting that interpretation, it is worth returning to the word itself, the meaning of Archon. The Greek word Archon, Archon, broadly means ruler, governor, authority, or administrator. It comes from arche, associated with rule, authority, or governing principle. The word itself does not inherently mean demon, parasite, jailer, or enemy. Its meaning depends upon the cosmological system in which it is used. In ancient philosophical and religious traditions, an archon could therefore represent a governing principle or intelligence responsible for maintaining order within a particular domain. This distinction becomes important because the modern image of the archon often assumes the conclusion before examining the function. If something governs a system, we instinctively ask, why is it controlling us? But governance and oppression are not synonymous. A governing structure can restrict certain possibilities while simultaneously preserving the conditions necessary for the system to function. The laws of physics restrict what matter can do. Biology restricts what a particular organism can do. The human nervous system restricts what the mind can immediately perceive. Yet these restrictions do not necessarily constitute oppression. They create structure, moving beyond the cosmic villain. The tendency to personify every limitation as an enemy is deeply human. When something prevents us from doing what we want, we naturally search for an agent responsible for the obstruction. If the obstacle is visible, we call it a person, institution, or circumstance. If it is invisible, we may describe it as an energy, entity, force, or intelligence. The prison planet narrative extends this instinct into the cosmological realm. Humanity experiences limitation. Therefore, something must be imposing the limitation. That something becomes the Archon. The Archon then becomes the explanation for suffering, ignorance, repetition, temptation, energetic restriction, and even the structure of incarnation itself. Once this framework is established, almost every limitation can be interpreted as intentional interference. But there is another possibility. What if the structures limiting consciousness are not necessarily designed to prevent its evolution, but to regulate the conditions under which evolution occurs? This changes the role of the Archon completely. The Archon is no longer the villain standing between consciousness and freedom. It becomes the administrator of the environment through which consciousness develops. Administration versus oppression. Consider the difference between a prison and a school. Both may contain rules, both may contain boundaries, both may restrict certain behaviors, both may have authorities responsible for maintaining those boundaries. Yet their purposes are completely different. A prison restricts movement because confinement is the objective. A school restricts the learning environment because development is the objective. The existence of authority alone, therefore, tells us very little about its purpose. This distinction provides an important alternative interpretation of the Archons. If reality operates according to consistent laws, then something must maintain the integrity of those laws. Within the philosophical model proposed by this book, the Archons can be understood as representations of that governing intelligence. Their function is not necessarily to prevent consciousness from becoming free. Their function is to ensure that consciousness encounters the conditions appropriate to its present stage of development. A child cannot simply skip every stage of education and begin with advanced knowledge. Likewise, consciousness may not be able to bypass every limitation simply because it wishes to. The restriction itself may be part of the lesson. Chesh, lawfulness, instead of malice. One of the most important shifts in this book is the movement from moral interpretation to mechanical interpretation. We tend to interpret unpleasant experiences morally. If something hurts us, we ask who caused it. If something restricts us, we ask who is responsible. If something prevents us from achieving what we want, we assume someone or something must be acting against us. But a lawful universe does not need to operate through malice. Gravity does not punish the person who falls. Fire does not hate the person who touches it. The consequences simply follow the conditions. Within this framework, karma operates in much the same way. An experience does not occur because the universe has decided that someone deserves suffering. It occurs because consciousness, circumstance, action, and consequence interact according to lawful principles. The universe does not need to be angry with us for an experience to be difficult. It only needs to be structured. This distinction becomes particularly important when considering the Archons. If they are understood as administrators of lawful order, then their function is not fundamentally moral. They do not need to hate humanity. They do not need to deceive humanity. They do not even need to judge humanity. They simply maintain the conditions through which the system operates. The administrator does not create the curriculum. An administrator of a school does not personally invent every lesson a student experiences. The administrator maintains the structure within which education can occur. Likewise, within this model, the archons are not necessarily the ultimate source of existence or the authors of consciousness itself. They represent a layer of administration within a much larger cosmic architecture. The curriculum is greater than the administrator. The system is greater than any individual governing function. And consciousness itself may ultimately originate beyond the structures through which it currently experiences reality. This distinction prevents the Archon concept from becoming another version of the same cosmic dualism. If we simply replace evil gods with evil archons, we have not actually escaped the prison mentality. We have only changed the name of the jailer. The deeper possibility is that there may be no cosmic enemy at all. There may simply be layers of lawful order operating within reality. Why would consciousness need administration? If consciousness is capable of evolution, then development requires conditions. Without boundaries, every possibility would be immediately available. Without consequences, actions would provide little feedback. Without limitation, there would be no meaningful distinction between stages of development. And without resistance, there would be little pressure for capacities to expand. Structure, therefore, becomes an essential component of learning. This is why the concept of administration matters. The purpose of administration is not necessarily to keep consciousness small. It may be to ensure that consciousness develops in an ordered sequence. The boundary exists until the capacity required to move beyond it has developed. When that capacity emerges, the boundary no longer serves the same function. This gives a completely different meaning to spiritual liberation. Liberation does not necessarily mean escaping the administrators. It may mean developing beyond the conditions that required their administration in the first place. From enemy to function. The deeper lesson is that we may have mistaken function for intention. We see limitation and assume oppression. We see restriction and assume imprisonment. We encounter friction and assume interference. We experience karmic consequence and assume punishment. But the same phenomena can be interpreted through another lens. Limitation can provide structure. Restriction can preserve the conditions for learning. Friction can reveal undeveloped capacity. Karmic consequence can provide feedback. And administration can maintain the integrity of the system. This does not require us to declare that every unpleasant experience is beneficial or that suffering should simply be accepted without question. It asks something more subtle. What if the existence of limitation does not prove the existence of an enemy? That question opens the door to an entirely different understanding of reality. The Archon within this philosophical framework is no longer the figure standing between consciousness and liberation. It is the principle of lawful administration that makes the curriculum possible. And if that is true, then the ultimate goal is not to defeat the Archons. It is to understand the system they administer. Because when consciousness develops beyond the level at which a particular restriction is necessary, the restriction itself can become unnecessary. The administrator does not need to be defeated. The lesson simply needs to be learned.